Good morning, everyone. This is Sharzad Morgan here, and today we're going to talk about what is wrong with the modern dating market, because most people are very disenchanted and they're very confused. This is not the dating market of the 60s or the 70s. So much has changed, and in order to get a better understanding of this, we're going to turn to the work of a Norwegian researcher named Mads Larsen, from his book Stories of Love, From Vikings to Tinder, The Evolution of Modern Mating Ideologies, Dating Dysfunction, and Demographic Collapse. And he uses different stories of different ages that really exemplify the type of mating strategy that was used. I know many of you are familiar with the book Sex at Dawn, which I really love, and it talks about our early mating. And a lot of people, especially men, love to refer to the fact that they're meant to fuck a lot of women, because in early days before the advent of agriculture, people were what's called polygynous, or they just fucked anyone in their tribe. And some people point to this as a superior system. But it's interesting to note that this type of society keeps people in a tribal stage. When men are fighting over women, they're not creating civilizations. It was only when monogamy was introduced, and we'll get into why that happened, that society was able to flourish. This is very important. When societies are left to this kind of wild, polygynous mating strategy, it did not flourish. Men were fighting over women, they were raping women, women had no power, and it wasn't that these women were necessarily happy. We don't know that they were happy. In fact, we know that only half of men reproduced. So many men had no woman at all. So let's not glorify this unbridled mating as ideal for society. I think it benefited some men, but now we have unbridled mating, right? It's free love. Anyone can fuck anyone. People don't want that, and it's not working except for a small percentage of the upper men. It is actually true. I was wrong. So we're going to get into this a little bit more. I'm going to be making a bunch of different videos about it. In this video today, I'm going to give you an overview of the different ways that historically people have mated. Okay, because now we get to choose our partners, but it wasn't always that way. And I don't think it was that way back then. I think this was a time that was extremely difficult for women. I think they didn't like the sex they were getting. They didn't like the men they were with, but they were forced by needing a protector and a resource provider. They were like shuttled into these arrangements, if you will. And society was not able to progress. This is very important. When people are like, well, we were meant to fuck like bonobos. Have you seen bonobos build cities or civilizations? You remain backwards as a society when you just give in to your mating instincts. And that's why we're having a demographic collapse. You guys, this is serious. I did not know how serious this was. In South Korea, in 3 generations, there will be no more people. People have stopped mating, having sex, and wanting children. And researchers around the world have puzzled over this for a long time. And we're going to get into why this is happening, okay? So in this chapter, I'm going to go over the introduction to his book, which gives us an overview, like I said, of the different mating strategies. And why people are researching this. They're not researching this because we have our hearts broken and we're disappointed. They're researching this because we have an impending demographic collapse. Now, if you've never heard of this, you're not alone. I had not heard of it until I kept reading Elon Musk on Twitter talk about a demographic collapse, a lowered fertility rate. And I was thinking, why do you care? Do you need more people for war or what? But this could be, we're going to be ending civilization at this rate. So humanity is approaching a demographic abyss. And I'm going to be like reading a little bit off of some highlights from his book, which his book, by the way, is like 100 $45. Now today was $145 on Amazon. So I did print it out. Okay, I went to the UPS store and had it printed out. So in more and more countries, the fertility rate has fallen below replacement levels. The country in the greatest decline is South Korea, with a rate of 0.7 children per woman. So you want to have two children per woman is a replacement. They don't count the men, they count the women. 0.7 in South Korea. Some experts warn that a too rapid aging of national populations is our era's greatest threat to civilization, or that we might be headed for extinction. Now, the Nordic countries, and this researcher, Mats Larsen, is a Norwegian researcher. He did this project with a grant from a European Commission. The Nordic countries used to be a Western anomaly. They had a much higher fertility than all the other countries where fertility has been in decline, women having fewer children. I've seen this myself. I used to see babies and children everywhere when I was a young mom. Now it's pretty rare for me to see children anymore. The high fertility rate of the Nordic countries was assumed to result from gender equality and generous parental welfare, because in those countries, they've made a big effort over many generations to give equal rights to women and to give very generous parental welfare, meaning that over a lifetime of a woman, she gets $1.2 million from the state. And this is all paid by the taxes, mostly from men. And initially, this seemed to work really well because their fertility rate remained high. However, in the 2010s, Nordic fertility numbers plummeted. Experts give an impression of not knowing why this is occurring or which policies could counter the impending collapse. Certain factors are thought to contribute to this, such as urbanization, good contraceptives, a fear of the future, gender equality, economic inequality, and rampant individualism. So in this book, he's going to investigate the perhaps most foundational factor, which is our present era's ideology of love. So how did we start out? Our ancestors evolved the capacity for romantic love probably around 4 million years ago. And as our offspring grew increasingly needy, fathers were incentivized to contribute with calories and protection. So this emergence of what we call modern love or strong emotions between parents molded cooperation through the child's most vulnerable phase. Since then, human mating has kept changing. Different environments produce different ways of thinking and acting with regard to copulation and pair bonding. So he has a chart in here in which he outlines the different periods of pair bonding. You don't have to copy this or remember this. I'm just going to kind of explain it to you a little bit in just a little overview. So he starts with the process of change accelerated a millennium ago. The emergence of modernity required that the West develop and forge consensus around a new line of mating moralities. So we had, like I said, sex at dawn, everybody's fucking everyone, we live in small tribes. And then around, I guess I would say he starts around 1250. So like 1,000 years ago. We had what is called heroic love. That's like when the Vikings invaded other countries and raped and pillaged the women and started owning the women. This was like a period of great plundering. and a woman had to submit to the hero. But the hero was often a predator. Let's not make him out to be this big romance guy. So the earliest mating ideology was heroic love, okay? Because before that, in Sex at Dawn, there was no ideology. People just lived in these tribes and just tried to survive. Then they had these ideologies started, okay? We're going to start with heroic love, where the woman should submit to the greater warrior. And don't think these were like kind warriors. They were not nice, okay? They didn't have to be. They owned the women. Women had no rights, and they were not treated very well. Then we had the era of courtly love, where they thought a woman should be treated with respect and a man should earn a woman's consent through chivalrous behavior and reciprocal passion. Then society evolved to want companionate love, which is lifelong pair bonds informed by pragmatic concern. This is like the area, like around the 1500s. Then we moved to libertine love, which was pleasure seeking through uncommitted copulation. Then we move to romantic love, in which individuals should follow their emotions and merge with a lifelong mate. You and I complete each other. We're each halves of one. You're my soulmate, that type of a thing. Now we are in confluent love, which is a pair bond should last only for as long as both parties benefit. The emphasis is on the individual, on seeking their own fulfillment, their own pleasure, their own freedom. And that's where we are today. And this is why people don't want to mate anymore, because this focus on individualism is the problem, actually. But again, no one wants to go back to how any of this was before. So we're going to go into a little bit more detail now, okay? To understand today's dysfunctional dating markets, which contribute to the impending demographic collapse, we must understand how the post-1968 ideal of confluent love affect our thoughts and behavior. Confluent love is the problem, okay? When we focus so much on our individualism and our own pleasure out of mating, which is something we never did throughout any of our human history. This is a brand new human experiment of free love. We thought that if we can mate with whoever we want, if we're sexually free, if we don't need each other for money, we could all live more free, fulfilling, independent lives, and we could fuck whoever we want. It would be a free-for-all, like the time of this Sex at Dawn period, but with more gusto, more power, more fun, more adventure. So why didn't it turn out that way? Okay, like I said, in today's society, free sex is encouraged. Promiscuity is encouraged. You don't have to have children. Women are equal. That is kind of like an ideology of today's age. But we have had different ideologies, and these ideologies influence mating, okay? So it's called a mating morality. And each culture and each time has its own mating morality. Because at one time, women were supposed to be virgins, right? Until they married. Now that it's not expected. It's the mating morality, and it consists of the beliefs and the values and the morals regarding sex, relationships, and reproduction around which a culture, region, and its communities unite. Now, these mating beliefs are tied to the master narrative. That's the story that ties together a community. It makes them behave in a certain way, but also the environment in the other direction. The environment requires different things for mating, okay? Whether you're living in ancient times or modern times, it affects how we behave. Like when, in the olden days, when women had no power, they had to get the strongest provider and protector, regardless of how they felt. Well, now that women make their own money, they don't have to anymore. So the environment affects our mating, but also the cultural values and beliefs. When religion was more important in people's lives, then monogamy and chastity was more valued than it is now. So what the culture values and the environment both influence mating behavior. Had the second millennium church not dissolved Europe's polygynous kinship societies, the modern world would not have come about. This is where he's talking about how this polygynous society kept people in the Dark Ages, really. In antiquity, powerful men had been incentivized to compete throughout their adult life for additional women. Stark competition drove a zero-sum mentality that detracted from them being cooperative in their communities. Polygynous woman hoarding had also motivated attacks on neighboring people to abduct their females. Okay, so don't think this polygynous regime was that good. It wasn't good for society at all. After the West's first sexual revolution, a new way of life changed Europeans. So the first sexual revolution is the change from this kind of kinship to a nuclear family. Okay, living in nuclear families rather than tight-knit kin groups drove an increasingly individualistic psychology. So the first sexual revolution moved us from kinship to the nuclear family. And let's not forget that throughout history, when women had their partners selected for them in the nuclear family model for hundreds of years, and before that when they were just abducted by men, it was the men that chose the women. The women didn't have to evolve any system of choice or of weeding out charlatans or predators. We didn't have to evolve for that because we didn't have the choice that we have now. And this is a problem in mating, which we'll get to, is that women's choice system in selecting a good mate is not good. We don't have it because we go for the best provider, the hottest guys, okay? But we'll get to that. After 6 decades of scholarly research, a consensus is forming around modernity's origin point. How did modern civilization really start? And that is when we abandoned the polygynous mating regimes that had marked humanity's agricultural period. So when we abandoned this kind of like, let's fuck like bonobos, okay, we're all sexually free, that some people try to say who are polyamorous, that this is our natural state, that has kept society very primitive. It was only when we abandoned polygamy that we actually evolved as a society and started developing civilization. Had medieval Europeans not transitioned to the monogamous feudal order, anthropologist Joseph Henry argues with troves of empirical evidence, the West would have had a trajectory similar to those of the world's other regions which did not lead to modernity. So you can just look around at other nations, cultures, and tribes. Those who remain polygynous are still primitive and did not advance because men spent their whole lives just competing for women, and most men don't get any women at all. If we hadn't gone to monogamy, you would not be reading books on computer screens. The sexual egalitarianism that resulted from the church's imposition of lifelong monogamy, even on the most powerful of men, drove a social stability and cultural psychology that helped the West outcompete and dominate the rest of the world. Now, they did this in a way to shame women's sexuality, and so that's where I think a lot of people have problems. They did it by shaming women's sexuality because it was easier to keep women's sexuality in check by telling them about this God who would, frown upon them than men's, because men's sexuality is too powerful to be constrained like this. But we're going to get into that a little bit more. They did it more by shaming women. And a lot of the reason too is because they didn't want all these illegitimate children. That was very bad for society. When women were just having sex with men who didn't commit to them, all these women had children with no father, and that is very bad for society. Not good. So The next big change was the second sexual revolution. Okay, the first sexual revolution had transferred authority in matters of mating from one patriarchal structure to another, from the kin group to the family. And until the 18th century, parents had arranged most marriages. But Western psychology had become so individualistic that more young people felt that they wanted to make their own mating decisions. So the second sexual revolution was women making their own mating decisions. It's not my dad, it's not my kin group or my father choosing my husband. I'm going to choose my husband. And that was a big problem. Like I said, women are not good selectors of mates. We didn't evolve to be good selectors of mates because we only started doing this a few hundred years ago, that we started selecting our own mates. And this is a big problem. This is the underlying problem of why so many women are turning out to be insings and not pair bonding and not getting married and not having children, because they're going by their emotion rather than their reason. Our reason did not evolve because it's been not in use long enough. But I'm jumping ahead. So when after the second sexual revolution, which was really women saying, I'm going to choose my partner, the result for many women was catastrophic. More premarital sex contribute to a doubling, tripling, or quadrupling of unwanted pregnancies across northwestern Europe. Higher status men frequently seduced lower class women with promises of marriage, then left them to deal with pregnancies on their own. Instead of having parents arrange marriages of reason in line with the ideals of companionate love, who makes a good companion, individuals more often let their emotions decide. That's the problem. Since evolution had instilled in females a strong bias for the most attractive males, a mating regime of individual choice made women more vulnerable to the deception of the most compelling men. The era of romantic love reattached copulation to pair bonding, which contributed to a reduction in illegitimate births from the 1850s on. But in the 1960s, post-World War II prosperity and the contraceptive pill finally made it possible to universalize individual choice without many of the negative externalities that previous generations would have suffered. So romantic love typically had conceptualized men and women as incomplete halves who became whole through a pair bond meant to last for life. Sex was only justified within a heterosexual relationship of deep emotion. Confluent love empowered people to give in to a wider range of erotic and romantic and industrial phases. Females were strongly incentivized to pair bond with someone willing to provide for her and her children. Especially in the Nordic countries, women now have fewer material incentives to marry at all. With long maternity leave, subsidized daycare, and other forms of support, taxpayers effectively provide women with what partners otherwise would. Such economic freedom, in combination with gender equality, adherence to confluent love, and hyper-competitive dating markets, influences women to increasingly channel mating opportunities to the top 5% of men, whose access to new sex partners has increased by 32%. The same American study showed an equivalent reduction in sex partners among the men at the bottom. Women discriminate between men more strongly because the modern environment empowers them to do so. After eons of patriarchal interference, Western females have regained the power of sexual selection. They are in a situation evocative to that of their early hominin forebears, who probably mated promiscuously, which motivated hominin females to channel reproductive opportunities mostly to the high status males. That was more than 4 million years ago. Since then, pair bonding has shaped our psychologies in a way that makes promiscuous mating less fulfilling, especially for women. Humans generally desire relationships and tend to be happier when coupled up. 21st century women in the West may have gained practically unlimited sexual access to the most attractive men through digital and urban dating markets, but this has not been an unmitigated boon. After dating apps were introduced, there was an increase in the proportion of men who suffered sexual inactivity, but women kept having sex at previous levels. This no longer seems to be the case. One study found that in the 2020s, past year sexual inactivity among American women increased to 32%. Considering the ease with which women can attract sex partners online, this sudden rise in female sexlessness seems to signal a deep discontent with modern mating. In recent years, female scholars and intellectuals have begun speaking out against the adverse consequences of the post-1968 mating regime, or the third sexual revolution. The third sexual revolution, it was meant to free both sexes from cultural oppression so they could live out their innate desires. Instead, an increasing number of men and women are withdrawing from mating altogether. 57% of single Americans report not being interested in casual sex or relationships. The process toward pair bonding that began around 4 million years ago is now being reversed. So now he goes over promiscuous, polygynous, and monogamous mating. Around 6 million years ago, our last common ancestor with chimpanzees probably lived in groups of males and females who mated promiscuously. Okay, we talked about that at the beginning of this video. Pair bonding is practiced by 29% of primate species, but since bonobos and chimps are not among these, neither was probably our last common ancestors. In promiscuous regimes, which is what we had as humans originally, the male mostly contributes sperm while the female cares for the offspring. Individuals are free to copulate, but high-status males are favored for reproduction. Doesn't that remind you of what's happening now? We're free to copulate, but high-status males are the only ones that people want. That's the polygynous. Such an alliance between females and high-status males is the most common reproductive strategy for vertebrates. So if you look at nature, only the best males get the females, right? Most males just die out. By selecting males who outcompete others, females spread through the population whichever genes are more functional in a certain environment. So the hominin starting point thus instilled in females an attraction to the most successful males. That is a basic fact of biology. Okay, so there are two basic facts. Females are attracted to the most successful males, and males want to have sex with a lot of females. These are two opposing desires or strategies that are biological. Hey, this is not DEI. This is not every kid gets a trophy. We're talking about survival and biology. Okay, mating is an animal sport. Okay, it's like running, it's like chewing, it's like farting and pooping, it's like trying to protect your children from the wild. It's instinctually very basic. So you can't cry about it's unfair. We just have to understand it. And I think going back into our history helps us understand why we are where we are today. So over the next millions of years, a second attraction system evolved as biparental care and pair bonding co-evolved with a growing period of offspring dependence. Like many other pair bonding species, hominins developed a neurobiological capacity for selective social attachment. In other words, our ability to love each other developed as we evolved. We didn't have that ability to love each other. Over millions of years, our brains evolved to have mesolimbic dopamine pathways and social neuropeptides like oxytocin and vasopressin in us that gave us the ability to love or to feel love. So that's kind of new because we're evolving as spiritual and mental and emotional beings as well. As our increasingly brainy ancestors, our brains developed, okay? Our brains developed, our ability to love developed. And as we required more calories, each individual needed a larger area to forage, causing females to be more spread out. This was one of the several ecological pressures that likely drove the transition from polygyny to monogamy, as it became too costly to guard and provide for a multitude of females and their offspring. At the same time, new tools and weapons equalized differences in strength, allowing inferior males more effectively to challenge male hoarders. So, around 2 million years ago, monogamous pair bonds had become the norm. We do not know for how many million years hominins predominantly mated under polygynous regime, but this originary period instilled in females a bias for pair bonding with superior males. This is a key thing we have to understand, that women are wired through our biology to pair bond with superior males. This is not DEI, this is not fairness or inclusion. The same way that men want to fuck a lot of women. Okay, it's their biology, and it's our biology to be attracted to the most successful men. And I'm not saying all these are good things, but this is how we evolved. This is our biological history. Another hypothesis for pair bonding, so one hypothesis was that people were so spread out that polygyny was no longer possible. But a second hypothesis is that low status males changed their courting strategy and females responded to their innovation. These men started offering resources in return for sexual access and exclusivity, so that these previously marginalized males could increasingly outcompete dominant males that were only willing to copulate. So females faced a trade-off. They could mate with those males to whom their ancestors' promiscuous past had made them effectively drawn, or select less compelling males willing to be generous. Doesn't that remind you of the guys who talk about the Chad versus the beta male who provides? This is kind of like an extreme example, but maybe they're kind of right about something there. From this perspective, romantic love, or second attraction system, in addition to the previous one, promiscuous one, evolved to motivate females to have sex also with lower value mates. So male provisioning and female fidelity co-evolved in a self-reinforcing manner. So a woman has a promiscuous attraction system to the most successful males and a provisioning attraction system. A male bias for polygyny and promiscuity seems not to have been selected against. So men were not selected against for this desire to have sex with a lot of women. Male foragers may have had limited capacity for accumulating females, but faced little pressure for not wanting to do so. Similarly, females concluded that provisioning low-status males mostly offered the better deal, but faced little pressure for not desiring a higher status mate. Women too retained a bias for polygyny in certain environments, as it can be more adaptive to be the second wife or the fourth concubine of a man with abundant resources, rather than have exclusive access to a man who struggles to feed his family. A 2015 study of ancient DNA shocked scientists. From 7,000 to 5,000 years ago, Y chromosome diversity diminished by 95%, while female gene diversity increased in line with population growth. 19 of 20 males disappeared from the genetic record. So they think this is because for 2 millennia, the hegemonic practice seems to have been intertribal warfare with systematic annihilation or castration of every defeated male, followed by impregnation of the conquered females. Those kin groups who refrained from or failed at such practices mostly had the Y chromosomes wiped out from the genetic record. See, like, people were not, you see all the wars we have now? We have, like, the US is involved in so many wars right now and toppling regimes right now. We were always warring people. Like, a lot of humanity history is marked by strong periods of war and conquering other lands, stealing their lands, killing the men, raping the women. And that's what happened. The strongest men conquered the lands, killed the other men, impregnated the women, and so 19 out of 20 men were just eliminated. That's mating, you guys. The history of mating is not like Prince Charming. There's a lot of brutality and nastiness in this. People think, oh, you know, I'm going to go on a date. You got to get down to the biology and the basics of what drives people. This is not every kid gets a trophy time, you guys. From a present perspective, it is challenging to relate to how our tribal ancestors mated. And then to end the introduction, today's dysfunction stems from Western societies not having found the norms and values that could reconcile individual choice with communal needs. The utopia of confluent love was that freeing women and men from cultural oppression would allow them to live out their desires, which would increase human well-being and underpin better societies. After more than a half a century's hegemony, this mating regime seems now to be peaking, similar to how the romantic regime peaked in the 1950s. We're discovering that the utopia of our mating morality is precisely that, a utopia, one that will not deliver on its promise. In the next video, I'm going to cut right to the most important and fun part of this book, which is on incels and insings, which is where we are now in our dating market. I think you guys, if you found this video a little bit tedious because it went through the history, the next video will be a lot more fun because it's going to cut right to where we are now and go talk about Tinder and all of that. So I hope you've enjoyed these videos. If you want to leave a comment, head over to the members area. Once you subscribe to the channel, you'll see a join button, and the members is $4.99 a month. Members can leave comments, and I also share more personal things for the members. I turned the comments off a few weeks ago because I, as a woman, deserve to be treated with the same respect that I give out to the community. And not everyone, I don't want to be accessible to anyone on the internet who has a phone. I want to only be accessible to people who treat me with respect and kindness. That's why the comments are turned off. I'm sorry. I really enjoyed having the comments on because I felt like you're listening to me. I want to listen to you. I liked it being interactive, and I learned a lot from the comments. I made videos about the comments. It gave me ideas for new topics. Another way to leave a comment is to, if you go to the bio of my YouTube channel, there's a link to buy me a coffee. So for $5, you can buy me a coffee, and then in that there's a place for you to leave a note. So for $5, you can leave a comment. If not, just keep enjoying these free videos and realize that just because you want to say something, you don't necessarily have to. Or make your own YouTube channel where you talk about this stuff. Thank you so much for watching my video, and I will see you later today for the next one.